All right, thank you. And I want to kind of start first, happy anniversary to NARL. We have to start there. My name is Nettie Belle-Hamer, and I'm the Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here, and I'm honored to be asked to speak, not because of my position at the university, but because of my lifetime growing up in Alaska. I feel very connected to Alaska, and I realized as I started to explore more as a researcher that I really saw a very small part of Alaska for my childhood. I grew up mostly in Anchorage, pause for laughter. But also in Fairbanks. And it wasn't really until much later that I really started to see some of the more remote communities of Alaska, which are completely different and make the entire ecosystem of Alaskans just that much more beautiful. So as I was preparing for this, I noticed that that with the university, we were established about 100 years ago in 1917. And we, first of all, our motto is ad summum, which means to the top. So I thought it was very appropriate that we end up at the top of the world today to talk about this. And I want to start with the land acknowledgement for where I work. I work in the Trothieta campus, which is the flagship campus of UAF. And I acknowledge that I'm working upon the ancestral land of the Trothieta, home of the Lower Tanana and Dene people. Their stewardship of this land over thousands of years makes my work possible at UAF, and I appreciate that. In a way, when I was looking at this, I feel like NARL and UAF kind of grew up together in Alaska. There's a lot of very similar dates that are important to both NARL and to UAF. We've heard a lot about the history of NARL today that I really appreciate. It really puts the whole thing into perspective for me. The University of Alaska Fairbanks has the Geophysical Institute, which was created by Congress in 1946. And so it's about the same age. And we just last year celebrated our 75th anniversary. And so there's a lot of comparison between the two institutions that have really had a big influence on both the Western and the Indigenous cultures. So at the university, we are focused mostly on the Western science, I'm going to say, but I think that we are more and more bringing in the Indigenous voice in a way that becomes one voice. And I was looking at something recently that said, wouldn't it be nice if Black history and Indigenous history and women's history was just called history? And I feel that way about the voice as well. So here's, I love this picture because I work really close to where this picture was taken. Is in 1966. I just for the record, I was not there in 1966, but I was alive. Who are we kidding? But I wasn't there. This is the Irving building. And the thing I love about this, we've talked about Lawrence Irving and how important he was to NARL. Well, he was very important to the University of Alaska Fairbanks as well. And we have not one, but two buildings that are named after him. And this picture shows what it looked like in 1966. And this picture shows what it looks like now. It's a little bit hard to see in here, but right in it is annotated where it's pointed to where that Irving building is, and you see that there's an entire expanse of research buildings that have grown up around it. So the university became the operator of ARL in 1954, and Dr. Larry Irving was the first director and established the first research program that was there prior to actually 1954. And that becomes important as we look at what we do at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We cover we cover a lot of different disciplines, and research is integrated across every unit of the university. It's part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. And research is one of three things that the faculty focus on. We call it being a tripartite appointment, where there's three things that we do: research, teaching, and service. And each faculty works within their own career to decide what percentage of each of those three is what they focus on a day-to-day, but they all focus on all three. So I view this as an important concept when we're looking at what the impact is of UAF, of the research on Alaska as we move forward. Right now, we are considered what's called a tier 2 university, which means high research activity, especially for the size of our university in Alaska. And we are striving to be tier 1. And as I listen today, and as we talk tomorrow, I think that the only way that the University of Alaska Fairbanks is going to reach tier 1 is if we do it together with the rest of Alaska, as we work together in the research, but also in putting forward the priorities for a way of life. About 80% of the research that's conducted at UAF is relevant to Alaska's peoples and industries. I think of it as the drop in the water. I can't do this without my hands. I have to put this down. Anyway, so you have the drop and it has the ripple effect. So there's the technology impact, or the research scientific impact, but then it ripples out, and there's a community impact, there's a state impact. And as we go out farther, there's a global impact. And we have to be aware of all of those ripples when we're doing our work. And I think that is one of the ways that we have to focus in order to move forward at UAF. So I put this photo in of sea ice because one of the things that Lynn and I were talking about last night I did get an opportunity to dance, by the way. That was fantastic. And but when we were talking about last night about our own personal experiences in the Arctic, like I said, I came to Alaska when I was 2 years old. I didn't have any say in that matter, right? I came as a 2-year-old. I will forever be grateful to my parents for coming to Alaska in order for my dad to check a box that said he's lived in Alaska for 2 years. Well, we came in 65, don't do the math. We came in 65, and my dad never left. This is where he came, and we used to joke about the 2 years, right? The 2 years is a lifetime. And he came and loved it so much, and he gave that love to his family. Well, the sea ice for me was pivotal, because I was well, I guess I still am a theoretical space physicist, right? That's what my degrees are in. As a theoretician, you don't leave the lab a lot, well, like ever, right? There's a lot of equations, there's a lot of computer work, and there's not a lot of people or interaction or even need for those two things. But I was at a science conference just about the same time I was finishing up my PhD. And I met a man named Jim Mislantic. I don't know if you guys all know him. So yeah, Richard, I knew you would. And so we were talking, and I said, I never get to leave the lab. I mean, I'm not lab. I wasn't allowed to leave my office. So, and he said, well, I'm going to go up to Alaska, and I'm going to do a couple of grid flights over the Beaufort. You want to go? I'm like, oh, God, yeah, of course I want to go. Who would say no to that? And he said, well, I'll give you a call when I get there. So he calls me and he says, I want you to meet me out at Eielson at 6 a.m., dress warm, and we're going to go on a C-130 and then spend the day over the ice. You can't have that kind of experience and not have it change you. It was amazing. So sea ice, it turns out, is beautiful in a way that you can't explain. just using equations. Although I will argue that equations are also beautiful, but in a different way. But that was really the first time I'd flown over sea ice. We were pretty low over the ice. And it was amazing. So when I got my PhD, I actually ended up pivoting to remote sensing. And my first project was to study sea ice, which was completely different than what I started from. But it kept me in Alaska, and it allowed me to do science here in a place that I love, and studying something that's really beautiful. Now, I'll just be honest and say I was still studying it remotely using satellite data, so I still didn't want to spend a lot of time in the Arctic, but I sure looked at it a lot, and I studied a lot of the Antarctic as well. So when I see this and says sea ice impacts are both local and global, to me that means a lot of things. To me, the sea ice is also very personal, and it's the Arctic is like nowhere else on Earth, and I am just so honored to be here again. So let me talk a little bit about data, because we have a lot of it, and I loved what the panel before talked about how so much information is in the heads of the people who are here. And we have at the Alaska Satellite Facility, I was actually the director for the Alaska Satellite Facility for 20 years after seeing the sea ice. So the whole story needs a glass of wine to talk about, but we have 13 petabytes of synthetic aperture radar data at UAF. That is the NASA's data center for this particular type of data. That's a lot of data, and it's growing. We're actually putting up another satellite here pretty soon that's going to probably triple that in the next 5 years. And that's just one sensor worth of data in one field. And you multiply that across the rest of the university, and it's a lot of data. I feel that was judging. It is a lot of data. I'm not kidding. So, but data is only as important or as impactful as its interpretation. And the interpretation is only important as impactful as the sharing of that data. So I think that when we look at all this data, if we cannot get into it and really analyze it and share it and discuss it, it's just a bunch of bytes and bits on a drive. So let's make sure that we do that we work together on these data and the other all the other data centers that we have there. So one of the things we like to say at UAF is that we do research where science happens. And these are some examples of summer field work in Alaska. We use this slide to entice students, because working in Alaska is really fun. And it's an adventure like nothing else. Now, there's only certain types of students who this looks enticing to, and they're the ones who come. And so that's okay. But in the end, as much as I spent so many of my years as a theoretician working on my beautiful equations and doing all the work on the computer, in the end, science is about people, and it's about relationships, and it's about creating those relationships across disciplines, across cultures, so that you have multiple viewpoints that together end up with something more than the sum of its parts. And I loved what the panel said before. It takes time, and there's a mismatch in how we do science because of the way we get it funded, the funding cycles. There's a mismatch between that and the time that it takes to really grow the relationships. So I'm going to end by saying this is one of my favorite things. It's an African proverb, actually, which is so fitting here in the Arctic. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm here to say, I want to go far. And so let's do it together. Thank you.